Welcome to Wizards Institute, the #1 community to learn smart investing and financial independence. Wizards Institute offers members proprietary research and insights, regular events and meetups with investment wizards to learn, to network, and to profit. If you love our content, please click subscribe and share with your friends. Also, check out our Wizards Institute podcasts and YouTube channels and sign up for our upcoming book, The Investor's Bible, 10 Commandments to Financial Freedom, on our site. Now, let us go on with the show.
Today, we're very lucky to have my good friend and mentor, Dr. Evan Fraser. Evan is a globally recognized thinker and expert on agri-foods. He's a professor at the University of Guelph. He also runs the Arrell Food Institute, a leading think tank on global food systems. Evan's web video series, Feeding 9 Billion, has been watched over 500,000 times. And he has published 4 books and 100 plus academic papers on the future of agriculture and foods. Evan and I both feel agri-foods, including the need to soon feed 9 billion people, is one of humanity's greatest challenges. In this episode, Evan will share his unique insights on the future of food, of planet, humankind, and opportunities for investing in the agri-food space. Again, before I introduce Evan, Evan is inspired me in many ways. One is he's written, I think you're going on your 5th book, right, Evan?
4, something like that. Yeah, 4, I think.
So one inspiration is I'm on my way to my 1st book. And so some of the content here that we learn over the next few months, hopefully will make it into the book that I hope to publish called The Investor's Bible. The other way that Evan has inspired me is really to pay more attention to the agri-food sector. And again, I'll let Evan get into that in terms of why that is so important for investors if you're looking to invest in a good long-term asset class, but in terms of how it relates to food, pandemics, to food security, and climate change, and all these things that Evan has written about. Okay, so I think it's almost 8:05. I just want to start with quickly, Evan. I was just going through some of the publications you've done, right? And this is by no means this is just the beginning. So Evan actually wrote a book a few years back called Empires of Food. And really it talks about how food is related to the rise and fall of civilizations, which obviously is something that we'll touch upon today. Evan also has published a graphics novel series called Food Crises, which talks about global food security, which again, we'll discuss that today. And Evan, I think you've got another book coming out very soon called Uncertain Harvest, which talks about the future of food in a warming planet, how that ties to climate change. So again, I'm going to pause there, but these are really massive issues that I personally think ties together a lot of things that I'm thinking about in terms of how that relates to diseases and pandemics, food security, and what's happening now with geopolitics, obviously climate change. And as any investors knows, when you have big major themes that impact societies and humans, there's also investment opportunities. So I've had the pleasure to discuss this at length with Evan in the past year or two, and we'll go into that as well. Okay. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Evan. Maybe if you don't mind, quick intro, who you are. There's too many hats, and then why we're here.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody. And it's exciting. And as San was generous to allude to, he and I started a conversation up about 2 years ago. I think, San, you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and that was one of the, usually I don't answer messages on LinkedIn, but yours for some reason I answered, and I'm very glad
Thank you.
I did, because it's been a good friendship. So I work at the University of Guelph, where I'm a professor, just an academic, certainly not financially independent. So I think I would like to maybe learn something from you, San, and Christina, maybe you too. But I also am the director of something called the Arrell Food Institute. And over the last 5 years or so, we've raised about $100 million to put a research program together on the future of food. And pre-COVID, when I speak to investor groups, my message is simple. It's that the same technologies that created the internet and are transforming medicine are only now just starting to be applied to agriculture and food technologies. And so we're on the cusp of a massive technological transformation in one of the world's largest sectors that traditionally is extremely undercapitalized. And so right there, if you can find an investable items within that, there's a very good investment thesis. There's also an investment thesis around the public good and the social good and the environmental and social good of food. And because you can get at sustainability, you can get at the sustainable development goals, you can get at climate change, nutrition and health, all through investments in food. So for me, it's a perfect opportunity of a sector of the economy that desperately needs investment, where technology and innovation are blossoming, and where there is an opportunity for investors to feel that their money is not just generating ROI, but also generating social returns and environmental returns at the same time. Pre-COVID, that was my message to people. We're now in Canada anyways, about a month, let's say, into the lockdown experience, and suddenly the conversation takes on a very, very different tone. We are desperately concerned that our supply chains, our grocery stores are not as robust as we thought they were a month ago. I think I've given, up to 30 major media interviews in the last 7 days on this very topic, including 3 today and CBC's National tomorrow and whatnot. And that sounds immodest to be saying that. It's factually true, and it's an indication that suddenly we're waking up and realizing food is real and our food systems need investment. And so if anything, all the things that I was saying to investors a month ago, when I was speaking at the World Economic Forum in January about this very topic, and San, you'll laugh, I was, I'm jamming on the name, that our mutual acquaintance who wrote The Blockchain Revolution. Don Tapscott, yeah. So I was on a panel with Don again this year, and and he was like, "Yeah, that food thing, I didn't really think about it before, but that food thing's pretty good."
Okay.
So if anything, COVID-19 just turns up the heat on this one. I think there the fact that we are suddenly deeply concerned about our supply chains. We don't have the tools to really even measure or monitor our supply chains. We're realizing that that these rickety global supply chains that we currently are dependent on are not fit for service. And then we're realizing that, through technologies like artificial intelligence, through technologies like cellular agriculture, alternative proteins, vertical farming, artificial intelligence, blockchain, we can actually imagine a very, very different kind of food system that might be more resilient than the current one. So I think all the logic of food is undercapitalized, there's opportunities, there's a need for it, still exist. And now suddenly this becomes much more urgent. And so instead of being a 5 to 10 year planning horizon, I think we need to be doing this on a 1 to 2 year horizon. So as much as I can communicate with people with means, that they should be thinking about food as a sector of investment for return on investment and for public good, I think this is the moment. And Sam, you've got questions, so I'm happy to drill into the details, but that's the very high level for me.
No, that's great. Again, Evan, thank you. Evan's always been very media love him because he's such a great teacher and passionate speaker, especially now. So I thank you, Evan, and really appreciate your taking your time off for this. I want to just back up a little bit and sort of have you define the problem for us, Evan, because I've had the privilege of having so many conversations with you in the past year or two. And you've sort of defined for me how farming and food is such a big problem, right? As it relates to security, national security, geopolitics, the food crisis with a 9 billion population. You also taught me the links to food and climate change and other issues. Can you maybe just spend 3 minutes defining for us and put it, I mean, that's a tough challenge. Why is food so important? Why is agri-food so important? Why should we care? And I don't think most people know.
So let's start with that at the global level. The world's population is currently 7.5 billion, and it probably will reach 9.5 to 10 billion within a generation. The most conservative estimates suggest, or most estimates rather, suggest that we will need 70% more food by 2050 to maintain current levels of nutrition. And to put that into context, Economist magazine wrote an article on this a few years ago, and they said that, and it's true, I believe this is accurate, arithmetically accurate, that the farmers over the next generation will have to produce more food than all farmers ever have in the history of agriculture. So just, for me, that's just one of those extraordinarily revealing statistics. More food will have to be produced and consumed than all of human history combined over the next generation. So we have an enormous demand surge. We at the same time, we recognize that climate change is going to make food harder and more expensive to produce. At the same time, we have a system that is rife with inefficiencies. 30% of the world's food is wasted. So we don't have to produce as much more food if we can deal with the food waste issue. Agriculture not only is vulnerable to climate change in terms of droughts and floods and pest outbreaks, it is also contributing 30% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. So agriculture should be a source of the solution to climate change in terms of absorbing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. It's actually emitting a huge proportion of climate change, of greenhouse gases. And then the last thing I'll say is the food that we've got is very, very inequitably distributed. So there actually is enough food for everyone to have a full diet. According to the United Nations statistics, there's close to 3,000 kilocalories produced per person per day on the planet. But we also live in so that's more than enough for us to eat. But we also live in a world where both hunger and obesity are rising at this present moment. So we face all these very, very wicked problems and strange paradoxes. Where one of the most important sectors of the economy for human existence is frankly badly managed and deeply underinvested in. Sorry, San, I think you've muted yourself.
Great.
There we go.
So in terms of format, I've got a bunch of questions for Evan. We'll go to maybe 8:30, 8:40. Audience, if you guys have questions, just please type it in the chat any time, and we'll have time to have Evan address them. But I think what I just heard is farming and food we're talking about really is probably the largest contributor to climate change, right? We've got close to 8 billion, going to 9-10 billion people. My understanding is the Earth, according to a Cornell study, is supposed to handle only 2 billion humans, right? So we're close to 4 or 5x over that already. And then there's the whole issue of the quality of the food and nutrition, right? So these are scary problems, Evan.
Yeah,
how are we going to make it? How do we make it?
Well, I think we can do it in part with technology and in part with policy and in part with behavior change. And so maybe we just jump at those. I think the behavior change part comes in, and we're already seeing evidence that this is happening in droves, where consumers, especially younger consumers, are the quote millennial cohort, are choosing diets which are less resource demanding than their parents. And so this really falls into the protein category, where it's well known that producing pigs, chickens, and cows takes a lot more energy and water than producing soybeans and lentils and chickpeas. And so there is a real movement towards shifting protein consumption, partly down the food chain towards those products. And their technology is really helping. So the explosion of course, Impossible and Beyond in the last 12 months, big players, conventional protein players like Tyson, the world's largest chicken producer, or Maple Leaf, Canada's largest meat processor, making big investments in alternative protein. And at Davos this past year, I had lunch with the CEO of Tyson, and they're launching an alternative protein initiative, massive alternative protein initiative. So if the world's largest chicken producer, which 20 years ago I would have said was the most conventional, conservative form of agriculture, is saying we need a different protein system and we're putting our money behind that, for me, that's a huge shift that's just happened in the last 2 years. And it's partly behavioral change and it's partly technologies enabling that. So there's a behavioral role for technology to manage supply chains more efficiently and to manage farm inputs more efficiently. And the story I'd tell you there is when I was 18, 19 years old on my grandfather's farm in Niagara, I used to stand on the back of the tractor and Grandpa would drive slowly through the fields and I would throw handfuls of nitrogen pellets off the back of the tractor. And that's how we would fertilize the strawberries and the melons. Well, half of that fertilizer that I threw as a kid ended up as a water pollution in Lake Erie or as a greenhouse gas, and because it didn't land at the right place at the right time for the plants. The modern smart tractor, artificial intelligence enabled, GPS driven, perhaps not even a human being on it, actually knows where it is in the field and puts the right seed in the right place and gives it the right amount of fertilizer at the right time with very little waste. So we've got this emerging generation of smart technologies on farms, which are way better at applying nutrients than 18-year-olds hanging out with their grandfathers. Now there's costs there. There's human costs. There's labor implications. There's implications for rural communities. But there also is probably a very good news story for the environment and for economic efficiency, because we'll be much more thrifty and precise with our inputs. So there's just another example of behavior and technology coming together to make a big change. And it's of course enabled by policy. So government has to play a role, low-cost loans for the right kinds of investments, research dollars into the right kinds of research programs and things like that.
Okay. Evan, we like to hear your views on this disease and food and pandemics and relations to food and farming. There's obviously a lot of rumor and fake news out there and a lot of finger pointing, but what is your expert view on some of these links, if any? On how food and farming and could have been a cause or a major cause of diseases, including the current one.
Sorry, I understand your question. Yeah. Okay. So there's no question at all that the worst infectious diseases that humans get are of an animal in origin, and these are called zoonotic diseases. And COVID is a zoonotic disease. HIV is a zoonotic disease. Measles, Black Death, SARS, H1N1, avian influenza. They're almost all of the really bad infectious diseases that we get as humans come from have animal origins, and a large number of them actually find their origins in bats. So it wouldn't surprise me if we discover that the original host for COVID was a bat. And there's usually humans don't get viruses or infectious diseases from bats. There's usually an intermediary. So the bat passes the virus on to something, probably bushmeat, probably some sort of wild game that was hunted, and then probably a hunter got the virus, and at some point in that process of transmission, the virus itself will have mutated to a form that allowed for human-to-human transmission. So one of the reasons that we haven't had a huge bird flu epidemic, avian influenza epidemic, is that it hasn't had that mutation to become human-to-human transmissible. So you can get bird flu from a bird, but I can't then, if I got bird flu from a chicken, I couldn't pass it on to somebody else. Whereas in this case, it seems it is mutated and has become human-to-human transmissible. So I think the story, when we eventually discover it, will probably be bat into monkey or bear or something that was then hunted and that found its way onto a wildlife market or a bushmeat market, and at some point had made this human-to-human transmission mutation along the way. And that story, if that story ultimately ends up being true, would be a very, very common story to many infectious diseases, including HIV, for instance, which finds its origins in Africa, probably in a monkey, a bat into a monkey, into a human for bushmeat. And so whenever we see badly managed environments, a lot of human-animal interactions, especially with limited biosecurity, so small-scale poultry operations that get bitten by bats, those sort of things are real vectors for zoonotic diseases like the COVID one we're experiencing now. We don't know, but I think that's probably the story that will most likely emerge.
Well, we know this is definitely not the first time it's happened, and by the current numbers, even the alarming growth, it's actually still relatively small by some historical standards, right? What is your
worry on this one is that this was an H1N1 scenario or an H5N1 scenario, would be more 20%, and it would be younger people that it would affect. And so for me, this current predicament, as serious as it is, could have been a whole lot worse. And if I have one wish, or if there's one silver lining that comes out of this, is that maybe we will develop the biosecurity, the disease tracking, and then the food system resilience and medical system resilience strategies, so that if an H1N1 epidemic emerges next year, because that threat hasn't gone away, of course, that we've actually learned something and are better prepared to adapt to a really bad epidemic.
Are we going to see a lot more of it, Evan, given obviously the huge growth in population, urbanization, and more consumption of animals and proteins? Are we going to see more of this? Or how do you see this playing out with COVID, but also in the future with other potential diseases?
I mean, we're on the horns of a really hard dilemma here. And I don't want my comments to sound at all callous or at all disrespectful of the hundreds of millions of small-scale farmers who depend on animal agriculture for their livelihoods. But from a biosecurity, disease control, zoonotic disease control perspective, we have to stop doing outdoor animal agriculture in small scales where there's lots of wildlife, human, livestock interactions. We have to stop doing bushmeat. We have to stop doing all those markets at a global level. We just have to, because we're too vulnerable to zoonotic diseases. And I think this again and I think there'll be huge pressure to do this over the next couple of years. And this will put additional fire in the alternative protein sector, where the Tyson's, last year positioning itself to create chicken meat that doesn't involve chickens, or the finless tuna fish that doesn't require tuna, right? These cellular agriculture models, or the Impossible and Beyond, I think become more relevant, not less, given the threat of zoonotic diseases. And my suspicion is that we will see huge expanse in those technologies, and then a very difficult set of challenges for development experts and governments in poorer countries, where raising a few chickens and a pig is a really, really important way of getting out of poverty for a small scale farmer. Okay. It's just one more. It's a wicked problem, though. It's a really wicked problem. It's not an easy one to solve.
Just one more question on the pandemic, and then we'll loop back to the investment questions and opportunities, because that's really the main purpose of this platform. And I know you're not you're an expert in many things. I know you're not a pandemic expert, but I'm curious, in your travels and in your many meetings with smart people, how you see this playing out, this current pandemic.
Well, I mean, I can only speak really with any authority to the food dimension of it. I don't know about the epidemiology or the economic ramifications.
Sure.
From a food perspective, I think we've got three waves of impact. And the first one, I think the first wave of impact is probably gone and done. And that was in Canada anyways. That was 3-4 weeks ago, when all of us, including myself, went to the grocery store and decided to stock up. And then, that week, when we emptied the shelves of toilet paper and flour barrel boxes and all that stuff, that was a short-term spike in demand that overwhelmed the grocery store inventory system. Now, a huge folks that are running our grocery stores, my brother stocks shelves at a Loblaws. Thank you to those people for keeping the food system going, because to a large extent, grocery store inventories have returned to normal. And actually, that's a very strong signal that the system is pretty resilient. Now, I know executives at Loblaws and Maple Leaf, and it wasn't easy. It hasn't been easy. It's been a very hard couple of weeks for them. But that's what phase one. Phase two is really about reorganizing the supply chain. And this is the fact that Canadians, up until 4 weeks ago, spent a lot of money at restaurants and in buying food outside of the home, and we're not doing any of that now. And so there's been a huge reorganization. Again, not easy, very hard to figure out, where farmers are dumping milk because they've lost their contract with Starbucks, and they haven't yet got the contract to get those milk trucks going into Loblaws. So there's a sort of a supply chain reorganization that's in the process of being worked out. Again, it's not pretty, it's not elegant, but it's getting worked out. Phase three is we're just getting a glimpse of now, and it's that's that
sorry,
parts of the food economy can no longer depend on things.
Yep.
Okay,
I'm trying to figure out, is it mine? Does everyone else also have Evan slightly fading in and out, or is it just me? Okay, looks like they're shaking. So Evan, I'm not sure if you looks like you're already by the window, but could you just repeat the last 5 seconds?
All right, maybe I'll pull the curtains, cozy up with the microphone.
Yes.
Phase 3, I think, is the most challenging of the phases, and that's the fact that the food system players, the farmers, the abattoirs, the meat packers, they're not able to get the inputs they rely on. So temporary foreign workers, 60,000 Mexicans and Caribbean people come to Canada to pick our strawberries and to prune our apple orchards every year. Getting those people in and working is proving a real challenge. Keeping our meat packing plants open while members of the workers get sick is proving to be an emerging vulnerability and a choke point that's really hard to manage. The dairy industry is starting to run out, I believe, of sanitizers to keep their milking operations clean because a huge amount of sanitizers being diverted to hospitals and health clinics. Well, that's threatening the ability of the dairy industry to keep getting the milk off of the farms. And then another choke point that's opening up just in the last couple of days is as plants go closed because of COVID, they need to get inspectors on them to allow them to reopen. And so we're running out of Canadian food inspection agencies running out of inspectors who are worked off their feet right now. So COVID's revealing to us a whole bunch of vulnerabilities that we hadn't really considered about our food system, and they're labor related in terms of foreign workers. They're input related in terms of sanitization. They're the concentration of our meatpacking industry, which is really centralized. And so this, figuring over the next 3 months, figuring out how to keep the systems running in light of these disruptions is going to be challenging.
Okay. So that's great. So just to recap, and I want to go back. So I think what Evan's defined for me certainly is really, and I guess for the audience out here, especially the young folks that are thinking about their futures and careers, the problems are just, these are massive problems, right? We're talking about 7.6, 7.8 billion people going to 10 billion on a planet that's supposed to sustain 2 billion people. So just the whole idea of more efficient food production, quality of food production, obviously in an environmental way, the ability to produce alternative proteins, all that. And what we haven't talked about, but I think in this session, but Evan, you had previously talked about that, I think currently 2 billion smallholder farmers, right? So we still have 2 billion of the 7.6 billion people in the world that are smallholder farmers that Evan's saying they shouldn't be doing their jobs, which means that we need to find solutions for these folks, which are primarily at poverty levels. But we need to really upgrade them to other areas. So there's opportunity to service 2 billion people, if not more. I think Evan talked about climate change and its links to, as a cause of, in farming and food production, 30-40% of climate change?
25 right, or 30, but yep.
Okay, depending on who you're talking to, but a massive part of it. So I think the problem itself, it's quite compellingly defined, okay? And I want to start the investment talk because, Evan, I'm not sure if you remember about a year ago, maybe 14 months ago, you sent me something that said the top 10 investment areas in the agri-food tech sector, right? So I'm going to just read off a few. In fact, a lot of these are tied to some of the great questions the audience is asking. So number one, you talked about genomics tools. Number two, you talked about alternatives to antibiotics. 3, vertical farming and the circular economy. 4, alternative proteins, which we talked about. 5, robotics in the field and need for data integration. 6, alternative to plastic packaging and smart containers. 7, e-commerce platforms and tokens. And then actually it's 8. Number 8, transparency, biotracers, and distributed ledgers. That's a space that I liked it. And then I think we talked about, I think it was just those 8, right? We won't have time to cover all those, but I like maybe you could spend 5-10 minutes out of that lot. You're sitting on $1 million, you're sitting on $100,000, and you're not trading or whatnot. You're really investing to help solve the problem, but hopefully also to make some profits of it. Where would you put this money and why? It could be one sector, it could be 3 sectors.
Yeah, I mean,
Everyone's sitting at the edge of the seats now.
so I guess it's all about patience and whether this is patient capital or not.
It's
And,
patient.
and this
Yeah.
is
So
something that I'm
we're a
learning from
trading.
you, San.
Yeah, we're an more of an investment shop and less a trading shop. So this is patient capital.
I've only got intellectual capital, which is the most patient kind of capital around.
But this is a year ago. Out of the 7 to 8 sectors we talked about that you had thought about a year ago, what would be, maybe just pick 1 or 2 that you think you're excited about, right? That has investment potential, and tell us why.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, for the sake of throwing some ideas out, I think distributed ledgers, blockchain type technology to create greater supply chain transparency. And right now, and this is extremely relevant given the circumstances of COVID on the food system. Right now, we are becoming aware in a very painfully obvious way that currently supply chains, one, they're very, very complicated with tremendous number of players linked in them. We really only operate on a one-up, one-down model where you know who you're buying from and who you're selling to, but you don't really know the entirety. So when somebody like McCain or Maple Leaf or Loblaw says, or even the dairy farmers of Ontario say, okay, what are all the critical inputs that go into our supply chain and where does our milk go? No one really has an answer. And so I was debating this with a friend of mine earlier this week, and she said, we're essentially travelers without a map here. And so I think blockchain with distributed ledgers and biotracer technologies can help us create a era of transparency or even hyper transparency in the food system that will be, if it wasn't important a month ago, it's sure as hell is important now, and we should be investing in that. There's a precondition though to that, and that's data integration. And these data-driven supply chain systems need a lot of data. They need data to be synced up so that the data on the farm links to the data in the warehouse, that links to the data in the trucking industry, that links to the data in the grocery store. And right now that data is, to put it mildly, fragmented, siloed, non-compatible. And so there is an enormous opportunity, I think, for computer science, people with computer science related skills and investments to do data integration across the agri-food sector. And then as soon as you do that, and this is the last thing I'll say on this topic, is you have to become aware that we need cybersecurity protocols. And there is enormous opportunity then for cyber criminals to hack into these data-driven transparent systems and be malicious. And if anybody doubts that, just think of the WannaCry virus from 2 years ago, when doctors and nurses across England sat down at their terminals and went, shit, we can't access our data files, our patient records, because we've been hacked by a bunch of cyber criminals. So when you sort of work backwards from transparency to data integration, you suddenly go, okay, we've essentially created an Internet of Things enabled blockchain driven system for our food. How cyber secure is that? All those sensors on a poultry barn, for instance, that control the ventilation system. So a modern poultry barn, the barn reads its own temperatures and its own moisture conditions to automatically turn on and off fans and air conditioners. Well, if a cyber criminal hacks into that system, they could kill those birds within a few hours by turning that system off. And so there will be a huge opportunity for ransomware. So I would say transparency, but a precursor of transparency is data integration, and a precursor of data integration is cybersecurity. Areas which need smart people to be building companies around to do those things.
Okay, Evan, I think at least on my side, I'm getting you fading out occasionally. Is it just me? Does everyone else too? It's okay now. Yeah. So you mentioned blockchain. Our guest last week, Victor, I'm not sure if he's on tonight, did cover real estate and blockchain for CPBIB, and I know you're hanging out with Don Tapscott. My own limited experience with blockchain, at least in the past 2-3 years, is just so much hype, but really almost no real application, especially as it relates to supply chain logistics. I'm curious if things have changed and whether you've seen in your travels a true application of using the blockchain to solve these issues? You talked about transparency and authenticity and whatnot. Have you actually seen anything in Davos or elsewhere
So
that actually works?
the short answer is no, but I think because we don't have the data integration systems in place. So I think for the transparency to work, we need to be dealing with the data integration. And for anyone that's tried to connect their phone to their smart TV, to their thermostat and whatnot, I mean, it's hard enough to create a smart house, let alone a smart food system. And so this becomes the data integration, the very serious challenge of data integration that we need to be working on. And I don't think the blockchain revolution will happen until we've got data integration.
Okay. All right. So it's 8:38. There are some great questions that were posed. I'm just going to the top.
San, do you want me to switch on to my phone instead of my computer for this? If you're having trouble,
I think it's 95% okay. Just is anybody else having troubles hearing Evan? Or we're okay? Okay. Okay. Felix says okay. Just before we move on to the next topic, Diego Bodart, I hope, says, can you expand on the definition of data integration and what that means? So the same question, sort of the question I had about blockchain.
Yeah, okay, thanks for giving me a chance to expand on that one. So basically what I mean is, I'm just going to give you a really sort of small example. Currently in the world, there are two major producers of robotic dairy operations. One's an Israeli company and one's a Dutch company. De Laval and Lely are their two names, and if you know it, one's got a red logo and one's got a blue logo, so it's like red versus blue. They look identical, these two robotic milkers. They operate from an outside perspective in almost exactly the same way, but you can't actually put the data that you get off of one milker with the data you get off of another milker. So for instance, if a farmer wants to do a big analysis of the rates of mastitis in their herds with different kinds of feed or different kinds of medicines. That's a big data problem that you could use artificial intelligence and deep machine learning to get at, but you'd need all the farms using robotic milkers to be able to pool that data in order to answer that question, what's the best way of treating mastitis? But half the farms used Lely and half the farms used De Laval, and the data off of those systems actually are in slightly different file formats. So you can't even stick them together, let alone bound up in different legal agreements with those two companies. So if, just there's one example, and I could give you probably 1,000 examples like that, where we need the data that comes off of these farms to actually be interoperable. In other words, they can sit together in a common database so that we can do exciting use artificial intelligence to come up with exciting insights and change management practices as a result. And we need regulations on data collection and storage, and we need computer scientists to actually do the work.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to just move on to the next theme, if you will. I think two people asked about plant-based meats like Beyond. Are they really better for the environment? And then will they replace, replace normal meats in the future? Again, I think there's a lot of controversy in terms of cost, in terms of whether or not they're truly more nutritious or as nutritious, and whether or not they actually are environmentally friendly. I think you've written about this, so please share with us.
Yeah, so there's a lot to say here. And I think, to be honest, the danger in answering this question is the danger of overgeneralizing things. So there are extremely sustainable ways of producing beef, and there's extremely unsustainable ways of producing beef. On average, most of the world's beef systems are pretty unsustainable, but I know some farms that do a phenomenally good job at producing beef in a very, very ecologically minded way. And so if you're a statistician, you'd look at the sort of the environmental footprint of a serving of beef, and the error bars are enormous around it. If you're not a statistician, it's just there's a lot of variation. If you're a statistician, imagine of errors around environmental impact. So the same can be actually said for plant-based products. I mean, the average is much lower, but the error bars are, again, very, very large. and then when you get into the world of cellular agriculture, it currently is very energy dependent, but there's been a few breakthroughs in the last year which have taken the energy requirement, I believe have taken the amount of energy it takes to produce cellular agriculture. So this would be more using stem cell technology and lab-based technology, has taken the energy costs of alternative protein down like a step function. So, so my gut feeling is that beef will, and I'm going to get normative here, I think beef should move to more of a luxury item. I think it will move to more of a luxury item produced in much more ecologically mindful ways. And where it comes to us producing or consuming sort of the stuff that goes into burritos or the hamburgers we buy at McDonald's and whatnot, that will that kind of low quality beef will increasingly migrate to stuff that really doesn't have much beef in it.
Okay.
We can talk about the nutrition side as well. I was talking about the environment there. If you want, I can speak to the nutrition side as well.
So bring up the crystal ball, Evan, in the next 10, 20, 30 years, do you see these various forms of alternatives and are taking a large market share from Mr. McCain and Tyson?
Yeah, well, no, they're not going to take a large market share from Mr. McCain and Tyson because Mr. McCain and Tyson are taking out big investments in these areas.
Okay.
So,
okay.
Yes, I think they will take a big. I think they will. Right now they're like less than 0.1%. I'm going to say they have easily the capacity to grow between 10 and 20% of protein consumption. I would not be taking out shares in beef production right now. I think dairy is going to be in deep trouble. I think we're almost have commercially viable ways of producing products that are almost identical to milk with a fraction of the cost in laboratories. I think cows and cows in particular are, I love cows. I love steak. I love ice cream. I want to eat steak and ice cream, not every day, but certainly every other month for the rest of my life. They're gonna go down, I think, in total proportion. And if I had any doubt in my mind at all, it was gone when I sat down for lunch with the CEO of Tyson as they announced their alternative protein initiative, and in January of this year. And it was like, all right, game's over. If Tyson's doing it, I'm in.
Okay. So related to that, I think I was looking at Roshan's question. Roshan asked, what about the shift in diets? Can you talk about that? Do you see diets changing? Cook versus leafy, more processed, which is that something that is a fad because of young thin people, or is it something that you see more North American diets, Western diets going towards more of an Indian or Asian diet, which obviously it's supposed to be much healthier for the body and earth? Do you see that as an enduring trend?
I think it's real, Sam. I think the shifts are real, and the data, particularly out of Europe, about young people and vegetarianism or flexitarianism or voluntarily reducing meat. I think it's real. I mean, I know I'm grazing into a crystal ball here, and I've got a lot of food industry experts that I talk to who are asking this exact question. And so I don't think anybody has a strong sense of conviction on this one, but there's an increasing sense in the conversations I'm involved in that people think this is real, and that the shift towards plant forward, flexitarianism, enabled by products like Beyond and Impossible, enabled by celebrity endorsements. I don't think that's going to go back. Beef consumption in Canada, for instance, has been on about a 20-year decline, and I don't think it's going to go back up. Not when Impossible burgers are almost at market parity with regular beef burgers right now. I mean, our local No Frills, you can buy Impossible for $3 a patty, and you can buy beef for $2 a patty. So that's in 18 months, it's gone from like 10x to a 1x in terms of price differential. Like that's crazy. And Maple Leaf is just starting to get into this. When they go to scale on this one, and they're planning on it, and when Tyson goes to scale, it's game over. And it's not gonna, I don't want to be too salacious. It's not going to be game over. There will always be livestock production, but I don't think the conventional livestock world will grow much in the next generation. And I don't think
we have any livestock people here. So
livestock friends, and I in a lot of families I know that depend on selling cows, and I feel for them because I don't think they're in a good space.
Gotcha. Maybe a quick seconds on insects as an alternative protein. What's your views on insects?
That's a good one. I think that there's two places where insects can probably play a role in the food system, and both of them actually are more as a substitute for livestock feed. I think insects make a very good fish feed and chicken feed supplement. So essentially, they replace taking wild catch for fish or soybeans or wheat or other sources of protein for chicken. I personally think that us eating insects directly will be a niche marginal activity. I don't think there's a huge market opportunity. Loblaws has been trying it for the last 2 years. It's a bit of a lost leader. It's a bit of a fringe product. I don't think it's terrible, but I don't think they're seeing much opportunities for growth in that. But I think as a livestock feed, specifically in the aquaculture industry, I think it has some significant potential. But there's a challenge there in that protein's cheap. And so insects have to be produced at very, very cheaply if it's going to be a substitute for protein. But there is the potential for insects, and this is scientifically untested yet, so it's a little bit early days, but that insects seem to have can be a replacement in some instances for antibiotics, and you can swap out antibiotics when producing fish and replace it with insect products that seem to have antimicrobial properties. But whether or not these antimicrobial properties are really therapeutic or not, that's where the science has to give us some insights.
Yes, and we need to pick the right team to bet on, right? Tommy has a good question, which I think leads to the next sector. He asked, will the lack of temporary laborers due to travel restrictions and other restrictions affect crop yields and ultimately consume prices? Probably that might link to some of the robotics and software plays that you've mentioned. Maybe you can kind of talk about that.
Yeah, so this is just the topic of the moment right now, because, and I think I mentioned this a minute ago, Canada, for instance, imports 60,000 laborers every year on temporary visas and these guys, most of them are guys. These guys should be in the apple orchards right now pruning, and they should be planting asparagus in Ontario right now. And right now they're trickling in, and my buddy Brent, the vegetable farmer up in Collingwood, is retrofitting his dormitory so that he can quarantine these guys. And it's just a freaking nightmare for the farmers. So yeah, it's going to affect our crop this year, 100%. Is it going to destroy the crop? No, but it's going to have impacts on yields, and it will have an impact on prices. Yes. So over the next 2 to 3 months, Ontario's growing season, Canada's growing season, US is in the same situation. Yes, we will see disruptions in our produce sector linked with the inability to bring labor in from Latin America and the Caribbean, 100%. And that will probably mean some products that we're used to buying are going to be more expensive and harder to get this year. In the longer term, yes, this is going to play robotics. So one of the previous pieces of research I've done in the past is looking at how agriculture typically responds to disruptions. And it's funny, automation usually is a response to labor shortages. It's not usually it's not usually technology driving automation. It's usually farmers going, crap, I can't get my labor. I better take out that loan and buy that harvester or buy that robot. And this happened in California, for instance, in the 60s. University of California developed a tomato harvester, developed a variety of tomato the fruit was robust enough to withstand the being picked by this harvester. Farmers hated it. It was an expensive piece of technology. They had no interest in it. 1969, I think, rolls by. U.S. government says, right, you can't import labor from Mexico anymore, guys. And within 2 years, tomato farmers had consolidated. A lot of the small ones had gone out of business, and the big ones had all invested in tomato harvesters. And the whole system flipped and became automated. And I think the 2 to 5 year legacy of COVID will my prediction is it will be something like that we will see rapid deployment of automation technologies to enable automation. And since money is basically for free right now, it's never been a better time to take out a loan and make a capital investment, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of.
Evan?
Lost them. We lost.
Should I sell out, or should I take out a loan and get into this? Get into the automation?
Okay. All right. We're almost at 9. I knew we wouldn't be able to cover all the different ideas. Evan, do we have your permission? Can we maybe post some of these ideas up as a post
Sure.
post interview blog or something, just to get some discussions going. This is fun for me because I'm getting a great update from Evan. But since I met you, Evan, maybe less than 2 years, maybe 19 months ago, Evan, again, single-handedly has convinced me to make at least 2 bets. I did make a bet as a venture investment in the insect space, which I'm still very excited about. And we had explored. Evan helping me to explore a venture capital fund that bets on the agri-food tech space, which hasn't happened yet, but hopefully someday. I've also made an investment in farmland. And Joel Faulkner, who runs Area 1 Farms, is going to be a speaker in a couple of weeks. It's the largest Canadian farmland fund. That's kind of a lazy deal where you just put in money and you collect a dividend. So in terms of, I think for us, venture capital is difficult because if you make 1 or 2 early stage deals, you have to be both a genius, which I'm definitely not, and you have to be super lucky to hit the Beyond Meats of the world in 1 or 2 deals. So to do early stage venture, you really need a portfolio approach. And as far as I know, there isn't too many of these yet in Canada, right? Evan, we've talked about this, but for investors out here that are looking to bet in the early stage deal, there's probably a handful of agri-food tech funds in and around Canada. There's probably a bit more if you look at North America that you guys can ping me if you're interested. Again, I wouldn't just do a 1 or 2 bet. If you're an entrepreneur, you want to start a business, I completely agree with Evan. There's a lot of opportunities there, whether it's robotics and whatnot, right? Diego, producers market. Yes, I'm familiar with the producers market. I have a question for Evan and for the group. In robotics, I've invested in ETFs, right? So essentially, it's just an index fund that bets on AI, robotics, and that's easy. Is there such a thing as a agri-food tech ETF? Evan, do you know? Does anybody know that if we're inspired by your talk tonight to, hey, put in 5% of our money into this specific sector, right? And we don't have the time or expertise to go and find the deals and just to bet on some kind of index fund or mutual fund. Is anybody here aware of such a product? Let me see. Okay, Anthony is saying. Oh, Diego, you're with Producers Market. All right, thank you. Okay, Anthony, can you tell us more about iShares? The ticker symbol is CAL. Okay. Yeah, tell us more about iShares. Is that an ETF for agri-food?
Yeah, it's it's an agricultural ETF, so it invests in anything to do with the agricultural sector. So,
but is it traditional ag like dairy farms, or is it more of the Beyond Meats and robotics farming and the insects of the world that are more? I think I think Evan's also more excited about. Really, we need innovate. Is more of an agri-food tech innovation, or is it more the traditional guys?
Probably more the traditional guys.
Okay, then I'm personally not interested. Mm-hmm. I'm more interested in the innovative size. Yeah, but yeah, thank you. We'll check that out.
Yeah.
Anybody else here that we'll post this too? But it would be interesting, for the lazy man or sort of that doesn't have time or to do all the research and don't have your expertise to maybe just buy into something that's easy, right? But like an index, or if you're into real estate, the Area 1s is also a good bet as well, long-term bet. I want to just respect everybody's time. There was a fun question that I saw. Maybe it'll be the last question. If Evan has time and we want to go beyond 9, we can do that. Let's see, fun question. Where was the fun question? I could have sworn. I think the question relates to, given all you know, Evan, maybe tell us about your diet. How do you keep so young looking and fit and so handsome? I think it was something to that effect.
So thanks to my 10-year-old, we are more or less vegetarian these days in our household, but that's because Gabby watched that Netflix show, Biggest Little Farm, and decided that we should stop eating meat. So we are a plant-forward flexitarian family, I guess, and I don't, I like steak and ice cream, but they're very much more in the luxury category now, and we eat a lot of lentils, a lot of tofu.
Okay. All right. Okay. Well, we're almost 9 o'clock. Anyone have any questions or comments before we let Evan go? This is his fourth, I guess, interview with the previous 3 much bigger platforms. Again, Evan, thank you so much for your time and your generous sharing. But anyone else have questions for Evan? Leland left. Okay. Thank you.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Evan, thanks. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Nice to
Bye-bye.
see everybody.
Bye-bye. We'll post this up. Okay, we'll post this up. Thank you.
Sounds great.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Please visit Wizards Institute to access the blog summary of today's session, to learn more about other speakers, and to network with other investment wizards. Wizards Institute, the #1 community to learn smart investing and financial freedom.